so I work a lot with pattern, right? And I always say, like, I'm working with multiple kinds of pattern, right? So one of the very obvious forms of pattern that I'm working with are things that are referencing quilt squares and quilt patterns. And I have this encyclopedia of quilt patterns from Barbara Brackman that I look at a lot. I also have a lot of vintage quilting magazines that I collect and look at. And often I'll take, a certain square, it might be like a log cabin pattern or a certain kind of star. And I draw that, and that is sort of the base for the main shape of a particular pattern. Then within that pattern, there are other patterns, right? So, this is taken from a quilt square, but then I've made choices like putting in these little squiggles, right? Or putting in these polka dots, or these tiny little squares or these triangles. Those are all patterns within patterns, right? I'm also looking at, in terms of reference material, game boards like Parcheesi, Checker, looking at things from the pattern and decoration movement, at textiles, at wallpaper. I think a lot about wallpaper patterns and these endless repeats, where I'll often create these meditative patterns and endless repeats in an analog way, where something that's drawn comes off the page on the top and it's coming back on the bottom. It's coming out on the right and it's coming back on the left, right? When I initially started working in that way when I was sort of thinking about video game space, or really arcade game space. So thinking about Pac-Man and how Pac-Man, it was such a huge deal because Pac-Man would leave the game on this side and he would come back on that side, right? And how that relates to this flattened sense of space, how that relates to maps. And I think of these as these sort of abstract maps that I've created, thinking about if we're looking at a map of the world is a globe, it's spherical, and yet we're presenting it in this flattened way. And so how do we do that? The top is actually meeting the bottom, and things are distorted. Our sense of what is larger, what is smaller, those are actually not accurately represented when we look at these flattened worlds, right? But it's an interesting sense of space, right? And so that's something that I'm kind of trying to get at in these pieces as well.